Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with a deeper look into some of the top stories in the global economy. Coming up in today's magazine, Israel's Technion Israel Institute of Technology launches Startup MBA. An expansion of the Panama Canal hits friction. First, a look at the headlines. We begin in Japan, which logged a record trade deficit for all of 2013. The deficit in December was $12.73 billion, double the 2012 figure. That pushed the full-year trade gap to $112 billion, the largest ever under the current statistical format dating back to 1979. Despite a sharp 18% weakening of the yen, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has failed to lift exports and reverse a trend of overseas production. Markets in Asia fell sharply on Monday following fears over China's growth and the impact of the Fed's tapering on emerging markets. As investors raced into assets considered safe in times of turmoil, the yen traded near a 7-week high. Moving on to European Central Bank President Mario Draghi, who said in Davos the bank would soon respond to deflationary risks. On a panel at the World Economic Forum, Draghi inferred the ECB would launch a policy of quantitative easing. The bank would package bank loans to the private sector and buy them if economic conditions got worse. Anemic inflation also makes it harder for the Eurozone's poorer countries to cut debt relative to gross domestic product. But the ECB is wary of angering Germany, which thinks monetary stimulus is bad for financial stability. Google and Samsung have bolstered their alliance through a wide-ranging patent licensing agreement as intellectual property battles intensify. The deal covers intellectual property already registered as well as new patents filed over the next 10 years. It may also boost the company's attempts to fend off lawsuits against mobile device makers using Google's Android operating system. Apple has argued that Samsung and others copied the iPhone's designs, resulting in lawsuits with billions of dollars at stake. Samsung on Monday also reached an agreement on global patent licenses with Ericsson. And Venezuela tightened controls in a bid to rein in galloping inflation of 56%. Although Venezuela earns about $100 billion a year from oil, its foreign reserves have tumbled to $20 billion from $28 billion a year ago. Venezuela's high rate is in part because of severe currency controls that have limited imports and exacerbated shortages. President Nicolás Maduro also introduced a price control law that sets a 30% cap on company profits. Back now to Israel, where the Technion Israel Technological Institute has set up a new MBA focused on helping students become real innovators. Natalie Ehrlich has the story.
For the ambitious associate on Wall Street and Silicon Valley, a common career trajectory has been the MBA. For an aspiring entrepreneur, could it be a startup MBA? That's what the Technion, Israel's elite technical and science school, is betting on. In October 2013, it launched the world's first startup MBA program, providing a foundation in traditional business management with an emphasis on entrepreneurship, innovation, and technology management. It's part of a greater trend of elite business schools like Chicago's Booth and Stanford, trying to appeal to the startup-minded crowd. The Technion Startup MBA is a 1-2 punch when it comes to name brands. The Technion, the winner of 3 Nobel Prizes in the past 7 years, as well as Israel's Startup Nation. Tel Aviv has more than 4,000 active tech startups and numerous R&D centers for tech giants like Google, Intel, as well as Apple. The program is still literally under construction, but it's managed to attract students from across the globe: China, Venezuela, and Mexico.
I think here the cultural value that you can get from some place so different than Mexico, it's a big advantage. And also the startup scene that is going on in here, it's a lot bigger than anywhere else in the world, even in Silicon Valley.
Miriam Erez is the vice dean and one of the founders of the program. She says its appeal runs much deeper. It's the values which are unique to Israel, which help students become true innovators.
Some cultures do not tolerate ambiguity. Everything needs to be clearly defined with rules and procedures and methodologies and standards and signatures of the boss of the boss of the boss. In Israel, it's not the case. Israelis are very tolerant of ambiguous situations.
That lack of top-down thinking, she says, allows students to explore.
The program says students are given access to high-tech multinational firms operating here in Tel Aviv, as well as practical experience doing internships with Israeli startups.
If anything, though, the decision to get a startup MBA could just be a classic business decision. The $35,000 annual tuition is a lot less than the traditional $200,000 price tag. Plus, the degree is earned in 1 year instead of 2.
And we're joined by I-24 News reporter Natalie Ehrlich for a closer look into the startup MBA at the Technion. So Natalie, thank you very much for joining us, first of all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so what is the appeal of this program, really?
Well, it's really amazing. It's been able to attract students from all over the world. I spoke there to students who are from China, from Venezuela, from the US.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is that, and aside from that, is even that Israel has developed this incredible reputation as a startup nation, and they're all reiterating that. And what has really appealed to them, they're coming here as opposed to even going to Europe or Silicon Valley. What appeals to them is that there are actually more startups here per capita than anywhere in the world. Even the startup capital of our whole earth is Silicon Valley. It has more per capita here than anywhere. So this is a very dense location filled with really interesting startups, whether it comes from clean tech energy to technology. And it also has a reputation. Just recently, Waze, which is a homegrown company here, it was acquired by Google for over $1 billion. And so that's raising a lot of eyebrows for students across the globe. And that's what they're saying.
Okay. And these students are essentially more interested in startup as opposed to going to business management as the average MBA student would?
Well, one of the Israeli students did tell me that he believes that 80% of the students are very serious about starting up their own companies.
Right.
And the other 20% want to do more management. And I do believe that it's more of a tech management. So these seem to be very serious. Obviously. Yes.
Okay. And what is this, what do you think this program will actually potentially help Israel transfer its startup character by way of the students? The students essentially come here because they're interested in Israel's startup nation stamp, so to speak. Do you think that this program will allow them to be imbued with that and take it somewhere else?
Well, I think the one point that was really interesting, actually, that the professor, who's also the vice dean, made the point is that what Israel has to offer is this innovation culture that a lot of other countries don't offer. Let's just say even Japan.
Right.
Some people noted that it can be a very top-down, hierarchical kind of culture.
Right.
And here in Israel, it's just more free-flowing, and people can really explore, experiment. And so perhaps after being here and being in that kind of environment, they can take that back with them when they go to their own home country.
I guess as the Vice Dean was saying in the report earlier, you don't have to go through signature after signature in order to get things done. A lot of things kind of more grassroots, so to speak. They kind of happen from the bottom up, which is what's so inspiring about it.
Absolutely. And I will say that the students are very serious about starting their own companies. Some of them have already started some. One person told me that he started something called Swarm Build. And it's essentially a digital factory that connects customers to online manufacturers, 3D manufacturers, so they put people in touch with somebody who can actually 3D print their product.
Wow, incredible. And I guess there will be much more of that also as more students come in and as the program gets more established, so to speak. And this is obviously a very, very unique concept. This is the first startup MBA as we know it, correct?
Absolutely. It is the first program as we know it. And I will just also add that it's actually part of a greater trend because Stanford, as well as the University of Pennsylvania, and a number of other schools, very elite schools in the United States, are very interested in this niche. In recent years, it seems like people are very attracted to the startup kind of culture. People kind of hope that they'll become the next Zuckerberg.
It seems to be one of the last places where there's money to be made.
Yeah,
Indeed.
And so even Penn, for example, they started their own incubator trying to attract people. But so it's really interesting to see how this school will compare to the other efforts that elite schools are making.
There's no place, I guess, like the Technion in Israel to actually have this. Thanks, I-24 News reporter Natalie Ehrlich, for your contribution. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
We move on to Panama, where the much-anticipated expansion of the 100-year-old canal has hit a low as European constructors demand more money. The following report has more details.
For over a month, the Panama Canal has been the scene of a standoff between the local authorities and a consortium of European companies responsible for expanding the canal. In late December, the Europeans threatened to suspend their work until $1.6 billion will be paid in additional, unforeseen costs due to geological problems with the expansion. For now, work continues, though its intensity has decreased.
Construction work continues. Up until now, there has been no suspension to construction. Even UPC have just sent us a letter saying that they will extend the suspension letter until January 31, but it's still in force.
The huge project, which began in 2009, is set to total $5.2 billion, though it was originally set to end this year to coincide with the centennial of the channel's opening. Independent experts believe that the work could go on until 2018 or beyond. The president of Panama has said that 2015 will be the latest possible date for completion.
We are going to finish our Panama Canal. Let there be no doubt in the international maritime community and the world that Panama will conclude the canal, whatever happens. That canal will be expanded.
For the time being, the situation remains complicated and volatile. The European Commission has proposed mediation, which has been rejected by local authorities. Still, the stakes are high, given that 5% of seaborne trade passes through the Panama Canal, and the aim is to double the size of ships able to pass the 80-kilometer channel to those carrying 12,000 containers at a time.
And we're joined now by Daniel Roth, I-24 News journalist, for a look at the media in Media Watch. So, Dan, I understand we have something from the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, so this op-ed, or really a letter to the editor from someone named Tom Perkins, who is 82-year-old multi-billionaire. He's a rich venture capitalist based in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Wrote this letter to the editor, basically likening what he calls the progressive Occupy movement to the rise of the Nazis in Germany.
Very apropos to the fact that I guess today is International Holocaust Day.
Yeah, and so,
okay.
I mean, first of all, it comes at a really important day for the memory of the Holocaust, and it's a very, I think the Gawker actually wrote a review of this article, of this letter, and they wrote, it's one of the most disgustingly tone-deaf statements on class tensions we've ever seen. And I think that that's absolutely true.
Right.
This guy is writing that, that the 1% in America, the ultra-rich, and, as we've discussed on this show a number of times, that it seems that the trend right now is that money is kind of heading upwards and not downwards.
Right.
And he's saying, well, the 1% in Germany, this was the Jews. And he doesn't actually write this, but what he's essentially saying is that the Jews were a privileged class, were a class that was taking from others. And this is kind of underneath the sentiment that I found in this piece of pretty disgusting letter.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's really dangerous. What he said was, Google, right now there's protests in San Francisco, people blocking Google buses, these shuttle buses that take people from the city of San Francisco to the Google campus nearby.
Okay. Right.
And this was the impetus for him writing this letter. And he's saying that the protests of these people who live in San Francisco driving rent prices up is, you're seeing the beginning of what could turn into a Kristallnacht against the 1%. So it's a really pretty scary sentiment that was printed in the Wall Street Journal, properly laid to rest in most of the internet. Most publications across the board had similar things to say. So it's, being that it is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, it seemed like a kind of important thing to say. This guy doesn't really remember the Holocaust well. And he's really not giving it the kind of memory it deserves. And he's really also not thinking about the way America ought to be in any sort of realistic way. So the next story is no less sad or disappointing from The Guardian. They have the story, a place called Echo Atlantic is being built off the coast of Lagos in Nigeria. It's going to be a 250,000 person privatized entirely, privately owned green city for the rich, essentially.
250,000.
Yeah, they're building
Wow.
giant walls to block. Every year, the rising of the sea levels actually wash away tons of homes in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And so they're building huge walls to essentially protect this private city for the rich from the effects of climate change, leaving about 60% of the country who live below the poverty line with next to nothing.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you very much for those last lines on the rich getting richer. That takes us to the end of our show. Thank you very much for watching. Please send us your comments via the website, Facebook, and Twitter, and join us again tomorrow for more interesting news.